Welcome to another episode of Six Figure Secrets for Fractional Experts. My name is Bradley Jacobs. I'm your host, the founder and CEO of Mylance. Today on the show, we have Doug Brown. Doug is the CEO of Sales Strategies and a renowned sales and revenue profit growth expert. He's founded or built more than 35 businesses and generating $960 million in sales and climbing. Doug, welcome to the show.
Hey, Bradley, thanks for having me. I'm so grateful.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about predictable revenue, right? Like that's your key focus.
Mhm.
What does that mean?
That means that you can predictably, with pinpoint accuracy in many cases, say, I'm here today, and in X amount of time, I want to be here revenue-wise, even on profitability. And I have a very high percentage of achieving that. And so, because too many people, Bradley, are having like up months, down months, up months, down months, or feast-or-famine cycles. And it's not really necessary. It's just that most people are just running on that transactional value versus, selling versus a predictable model.
Yeah. So feast or famine, it's like one of the most common phrases in the fractional world because most of them get their clients through referrals, word of mouth. It just kind of falls in their lap and it works for a little bit. And then all of a sudden it stops and there's this famine cycle, right? It could be a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. What is the biggest difference between someone who's running their business where they have predictable revenue and the person who's running their business and they're in complete feast or famine?
So the major difference is exactly what you said. So they're relying on one or maybe two methods to get business. And the master prospector will always outsell the master closer. And so if somebody takes that to heart, the master prospector is always prospecting. And so not only is the master prospector always prospecting, they're doing and looking for high performing activities, which will bring in clients. So what we train people on and teach people is let's create 6 new high performing activities over the next 6 to 12 months in your business. Then how do you automate those activities as much as possible? Because, as a fractional or somebody working as a solo, traditionally what happens is they get a client, then they're so focused on settling the engagement with the client or clients that they kind of forget about doing the prospecting. And that's one of the reasons that, it's like a wave coming in from a lake or an ocean. You'll see them come in a rhythm, but when the wind blows a little stronger, they come in faster and a little higher, right? And when the wind's not blowing, it's calm. And too many calm spots for the independents. So to solve that, it's really about consistent prospecting, but people really don't have a system around that. So that's why they don't do it.
Yeah. So, the number one challenge with fractionals is, as you said, they're servicing clients. They're busy. Right. They're one person. How can they really think about this from a standpoint of, you said they should always be prospecting, but hey, I got to be servicing my clients. Like, how do I think about this?
Firstly, you can extend through referrals. So that is a good thing, right? So always be prospecting, but always be building a relationship. So, follow up, people don't think of this as a prospecting activity, but really when it comes down to it, it can be. So while we're working through, instead of just trying to get the one transactional sale, we want to think about how are we actually extending the relationship, not only, one time, but multiple times. So a lot of times people get referrals as one of their methodologies as a solo, but they're really doing what I call a passive referral program. Yeah. So it's like they ask whenever people, they do a good job, somebody mentions it and it's kind of there. But what if we had a very well structured referral program where it's active, so that right in the, in our marketing, we're talking about it, in the prospecting process, we're talking about it, as we're making the engagement, we're talking about it, as we're going along, we're talking about it, right? And in every single structured step that we looked at, where it's happening automatically, well, then we would get more referrals out of the process without being pushy, because it's not like we're trying to be pushy. So that's one example of how to take a high performing activity, if it's working, and making it more automated, right? And you could do this through technology. We built a a SaaS, personalized, meaningful follow-up system, right? That's automated. So what they've got to understand is, and I know this because I was a solo for a long period of time, right? As we've got to schedule time, just like we're doing scheduling time for client activities. And people go, well, I can't do that. Of course you can. Right? And if people really want predictable income out of just this one concept, we can talk about metrics because those are my favorite, if you'd like to. But when we're doing this consistently, we will have consistent lead flow coming in. Now, the more we dial in our ideal right fit buyer profiles and our messaging, we're going to have not just leads, but we'll have more sales qualified or sales ready or even purchase order ready leads if we do it the right way. So, but we're having a continuum of that happening, and that's where people drop the ball. So it's like, look, if you spent an hour or 2 hours a day in your schedule, and people, I can hear them rolling their eyes, I can't do that, right? Yes, you can. You just got to work around that. If that became the first priority in your business, then you would work around that. Just as if you had a small child, you're not going to let the small child, let's say they're 6 months old. They're not going to get up and bathe themselves and feed themselves and whatever. We would take care of that child. Our business is the same way. We've got to do that every day for the business. And the business then will return us consistently. Maybe not predictability yet, because then we got to put math to it, but we certainly would have consistency.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, right? It's like you can make the time. You're choosing not to, but you can. Mm-hmm. What do you think is the number one reason why fractionals consultants are not making time for sales?
They really have untruthful goals that they're not willing to commit to the truthful goal. So in other words, a lot of times, and I know this because I've worked with fractionals and I've worked with solo people, for over 30 years. And you ask them straight out, what do you want to make this year? And they'll tell you a number. And then my next question is, wow, okay, so what's your plan to get there? Well, I think this, and this. Sounds like a lot of work, right? Yeah. Tell you what, if you could work half as many hours and make 1/3 that amount of money, would you want to do that? Absolutely, right? It's almost universal.
Wow. Okay.
Now, let's say the 80-20 rule applies there, right? So 20% say no, 80% say yes. It's not a truthful goal. It's a goal they want. It's the aspiration which they'd like to have, but they're not committed to it, because then when you start to break down what it gets to get there, there's a gal, her name's Janet, and she was a marketing and sales consultant. And I asked her what her truthful goal was, and she said $600,000 a year. I said, well, you're doing a lot of coaching. She said, yes. And I said, is that a truthful goal? She said, yes. And I said, well, okay, what are you charging per month? She said, well, I get $1,000 a month recurring. And I said, well, Janet, you're going to have 50 clients a month in order to hit your $600,000 goal. And she goes, oh, no, I don't want to do that. I'm like, that's the math, right? That's what's going to take at this model. And so I said, is this really a truthful goal, or what would be the bottom line? And she said, 350 would be really good. So we constructed a plan for her to do the 350. See, 600 wasn't the goal. 350 was.
Right.
Now, so we constructed a goal, and she was hitting that goal on 8 clients a year. Right. So that's the first number one mistake. The second one is they don't figure in the math. And the math meaning they don't figure in things like expense of sale, churn of sale, refunds, even inflationary numbers. They don't figure it in. So if they wanted a $350,000 goal, let's just say it took, 10 clients to get there, but their overhead was 20%. I'm making all this up, which would be low in some cases. Then they need 12 clients. So they're 2 clients short, so they don't hit their numbers. So we got to figure out the math on the front end. I think that's the number one mistake, and making sure it's a truthful goal.
Yeah. Is there a component, because this is one thing I see, is that they like serving their clients. They're good at serving their clients. They don't like sales. They're not good at sales. They don't enjoy it, so they don't really do it.
Well, any of us who have ever been married and have children, there's going to be lots of things you don't like in that too. But if you want a successful marriage or successful children, you got to do what's got to be done. Um, you know, I would agree with you, but then my first question would be to them is, what business are you in? And I just did this in a live event. They asked me to speak, so I was there, and I said, "Okay, everybody, tell me what business you're in." And I went around the room, and there were different businesses in the audience. One was like, "Yeah, we sell heating and air conditioning. You know, we're an HVAC company." Another one, "I'm a consultant." And what do you consult in? And it was like, I don't know, printing services or whatever they said, right? And then another one, well, we're a marketing company, and we serve XYZ clients. And then I asked everybody, after going through about maybe 7 or 8 of them, I said, "What business are you really in?"
Sales.
And they all were like puzzled. And so I said to them, I said, "Look, you're a marketing company that delivers marketing and product services. You're a consultant that handles printing consulting services, right?" And we went through the whole group, and I said, "How can you deliver those products or services if you don't acquire a client first?"
Yep.
Right? So you're talking about sales. It's the same thing. So I said, the real business we're all in this room is client acquisition.
Yep.
And you want to know who understands client acquisition better than most companies on this planet? Make-A-Wish.
Mm.
They're not Make-A-Wish because they're just mission driven. I know I worked with them, so I understand some of their model. They are a very strong company who is focused on client acquisition of funds so that they can bring those funds in to serve the mission. And so if we're a solo person, we must understand that we're in the business of client acquisition. And if we don't want to be in that business, then get the heck out of what you're in, because you're not going to be as successful in it as you want to be, because you're playing, you're trying to play hockey by the rules of European football, soccer, if you will, right? They're similar, but nobody's getting crushed up against the boards in European soccer, right? So it's a different game, but the game we're in, you and I and everyone else listening to this, we're in client acquisition. Yep. And we have a delivery of product or service, which we usually call that's what we do.
Right. At the end of the day, I mean, what are you and I doing here right now on this podcast, right? At the end of the day, we're adding value, and that's a great way to, nurture and build trust and all of that. But we're growing the awareness of what we do so that we can acquire more clients, right? Like, that's what we're here for. I don't need to sugarcoat it or hide it. It's just true.
I like you as a person, but I want to do the same thing, right? Yeah. I mean, it's the and that's, again, this is part of the marketing or prospecting and getting out in the public square. Some people call this PR, whatever. It's exposure. We've got to get exposure to get conversations going. So yes, that's exactly why we're here. Yeah. We're doing client acquisition.
Right. So one of the techniques you talk about, or one of the activities, you said high performing activities. I love the concept of an active versus passive referral program, right? Where passive, I just let things fall in my lap. Active, I have a structure around it, right? It's part of my process. It's part of my system. I'm asking for referrals at a regular cadence. I'm probably checking in with my performance before I ask for a referral. Like, how am I doing? Do you I used to have my clients fill out a form. So what are maybe 2 or 3 other activities outside of the active referral program that you would recommend for fractionals?
Well, what we're doing right now, speaking, is there, right? And there's a myriad of different ways you can speak. So podcast are one of them. Stage work is another way, and a lot of people, I don't know how to speak. Listen, you don't have to get up and talk about your product or service. Talk about a problem somebody's having in life or in the audience, right? I'm trying to remember, Jeffrey Gitomer is an old sales trainer, but he wrote a book called The Little Red Book of Sales. His first talk was not on sales. It was something, I think, like what he learned from his children today or something like that, the life's lessons he learned from children today. So, we all have issues going on in life. You can get up and talk about the economy and the inflation and the fact that right now the average person who's trying to retire, runs out of money between 8 and 12 years after retirement. And you could talk about that just from a perspective of you're not trying to sell financial services. You're not trying to do any of that. I'm a revenue growth consultant, and I'm concerned about what's going on in the world and how it's going to affect businesses and how it's going to affect the kids coming up, right? Because now they're going to be more dependent to pay for their parents, and their grandparents as they go along as they age, right? It doesn't really matter. We've got to get ourselves out there and position ourselves as an expert. So speaking is one of those things. What I recommend is what people do is they sit down and they write out SSSML, right? So SSSML. So there's 4 S's, and those are short, medium, long. And the reason that I have them do that is because we want a response in a client within 30 days. So what are the things that we can do for direct response? So I'll cold call. Not a lot of people like to, but I'm okay with it, right? I'll reach out directly from, say, a LinkedIn, right? To drive it to a conversation. These are all short-term things that people can do. Networking can be a short-term thing. And if people don't know where to speak or where to network, just go to all the local chamber of commerces around. They're always going to let you in. There's people there to talk to, right? And so, now what would be a medium one? Maybe writing, right? So publishing, writing for someone else's blog, something like that. You get in front of people, but it's usually not what's along? Running your own podcast, right? Starting a blog, social media, for branding purposes, building out an agency program or referral, where you're making relationships with people to bring you incoming business, not just on referrals, but they necessarily may be competitors or they may not be competitors, but you have like-minded interest in business to bring things together. There's a whole host of things you can do for this, but always start with the shorts, because that's the mistake that people make, Bradley. They try to go to the longs, and it takes them 6 months to get this thing going. Yeah. So they run out of money on the runway, and that's usually what the big challenge is.
Yeah. So let's talk about metrics, because I know you said you love metrics. So let's go to your wheelhouse. Let's just say our average client has 2 to 3, our customer has 2 to 3 clients at any given time.
Yeah.
Let's just say 10K a month retainer. So they're making between 20 and 30K a month. And the average length of that contract is 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
So, I need a new client every quarter or so.
Yep.
Something like that, right?
Yep.
What do I need to be seeing from a metric standpoint as far as, as you said, always be prospecting? Yeah. So let's break it down. Like if I'm a fractional, I'm in the situation, like what do I need to be seeing?
Number of reach outs that we're doing, number of connections we're making, number of responses we're getting from those reach outs and connections, number of appointments that we're setting, number of closed sales that we're getting from these appointments, number of follow-up closed sales that we're getting from these appointments, what transactional value we sold at, and have we sold a larger transactional value? And I think the next metric I would measure would be, what's the buying frequency? Are they buying from me once, twice, 3 times, 4 times? So in that scenario, those are the metrics I would measure. So why? Well, if you're not making enough reach outs, you're going to know right out of the gate, right? But if we're making reach outs and we're getting a very low connection rate, now some people might say this is a harder one to measure, and I would agree. If you can't measure your connection rate, measure the response rates. You can do that. I have tried 100 times with this, and I got 30 responses. look at your responses and go with a positive, negative, or neutral. Now, if they're all positive, woohoo, we're doing a good job, right? If they're all like, go away, you stink, I don't need your product, well, guess what? Your messaging and your value proposition's off. So when you're measuring these metrics, it tells you a story. But you look at the metrics from one to the other. If we got a lot of reach outs, we're not getting favorable responses, we're probably either not talking to the right fit buyer or we have our incorrect messaging value proposition going on. Now, if we get, let's say, 30 responses that are positive and we have 20 appointments that sat out of there's 2/3 a ratio, you're probably doing okay. But let's say you get 30 positive responses, but nobody's setting an appointment. There's a challenge within that metric somewhere of where we're going. So all we're doing is measuring these metrics. Now you can break down these metrics as fine as you want to break them down. You could break them down to positive, negative, neutral. You can break them down as appointments set, appointments kept, appointments abandoned, right? All of these minor metrics actually will tell you a story. And when you look at these metrics, it's going to tell you what to do or what not to do. And these metrics will compound on one another, which is really great. So once you've got these things rolling along and you're measuring them on a consistent basis, you can say, you know what, my close rate's a little bit lower than I want it to be. Let me figure out why that's the case. And maybe now we need sales conversational training or whatever it might be, right? Or maybe we're invoking, I'll give somebody a real life thing. Some people, I was at one time, I was the president of sales and training for a man named Chet Holmes who wrote a book called The Ultimate Sales Machine. Mm. And when they hired me, I looked at all the metrics and I found they had a 15.3% refund rate on the front end of their machine.
Wow.
And Chet was coming to me and saying, hey, we're like 27% underwater on the front end of the machine. And I'm like, well, dude, we got a 15% refund rate that's going on. Let's figure that one out. So we did. I looked at what the people were saying, and they were actually invoking the refund during their sales conversation. So all I did was take the sales conversation. They were basically saying this: if we haven't earned our money today, just let us know and we'll refund you. Call 800, get a refund, right? And so all I did is I reframed that whole process to where we added up the numbers that we would in our training. And at the end, people were reporting, hey, I just found $5,000 a day in my business. I just found 2.7 million. And then we just changed the language to, well, I think we've earned our $229 for this training. What do you think? And they said, yes. And the refund rate dropped within a day from 15.3 to under 1% and never came back up over that.
Wow.
That's the reason you want to measure metrics in your business, because when you measure the metrics, I also found 170,000 leads over 3 years that they never followed up on with the sales team. Right?
Wow.
So think about it. $13 a lead, 170,000. No wonder they're 27% in the water, right? So, but a lot of CEOs will look at from the top numbers down. They don't get into the nitty gritty. As a solo, as a fractional, you got to, because you are the CEO of the company. It's your money going out and your money coming in. So if you want to grow by a quarter, you can figure it out in the metrics, and that'll tell you how you grow by each one in the quarter.
Yeah. Wow. Such a good story. Appreciate you sharing that with us.
Sure.
I mean, I think it's one of those things where we all know we need to track metrics, but then when actually coming down to it, we get lazy or we forget, or it's like, oh, I'll do it later. And then you potentially miss out on, as you said, leads not being followed up on, or just, who knows what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, people know they need to floss their teeth and water pick and do all that other stuff, but they don't. Then they go to the dentist and it's like, you got 4 cavities. And it's like, no, I don't want it. No needles, no this, right? Well, you wouldn't have had those things if you flossed every day and you water picked, right?
Yeah.
But I brushed my teeth. It's not enough. You got to go that little extra in that process.
Yeah. The number of times that you got to go the extra has come up on this podcast. I mean, it feels like the difference between an average performer and a high performer is frankly just doing a little bit more.
It's doing a little bit more and doing it with what we would call strategic outcomes versus tactical outcomes. Strategic outcomes are, we want not just one thing that happens from everything we do, but multiple things. So for example, if I make a cold call and I ask people, well, when you make a sales call, what do you want as an outcome, right? And they'll always say, I want a sale. And I'll say, well, what happens if you don't get the sale? You just hang up and it's done. Don't you want to build credibility? Maybe ask for a referral. Maybe, get permission to have the conversation later on. I mean, what about building the relationship? What about extending the relationship? What about looking for another opportunity within that the existing relationship, right? We want multiple things coming out. So it's really about leverage and creating a compounding interest type leverage in the process, and then kicking up that activity. And then you get the expanding compounding leverage of the activities.
Yeah. You talked to, again, I'm going back to the activities, the high performing activities.
Yes.
How long do you spend on, let's say you're trying a new activity, you're trying cold calling, you're trying LinkedIn content, you're trying direct outreach, whatever it is. How long do you spend trying it before you know whether it's effective or not, whether you should stop doing it, iterate on the approach? How do you think about that?
It's an excellent question. I asked this question of a guy who wrote a book series called Guerrilla Marketing. His name's Conrad Levinson when he was alive. And I actually helped Jay's company early on. And that's how I was introduced to Chet Holmes. He's like, you got to talk to Chet, right? So I asked Jay this question because if people don't know who Jay is, Jay was legendary in the marketing business, wrote a series of books called Guerrilla Marketing, which is all low, no cost ideas to get it. But he worked in the advertising space, and he's responsible for icons like the Marlboro Man and the Pillsbury Doughboy. A lot of people know, the woohoo, Pillsbury Doughboy. And so I asked Jay, I said, Jay, what's the number one challenge in marketing that people have? And he looked at me and said, patience. And then I asked him, what's the number one challenge in sales, which we could get into a little more. And he said, 68% of sales are lost due to lack of follow-up. And so I said, well, tell me more about the patience. And he said, Doug, it takes 9 impressions upon the brain for somebody to recognize you as a brand. And I said, well, all right, that's not too bad, Jay. That's like 9 times. He goes, yes, but it takes 3 views to get 1 impression. So somebody actually needs to see you 27 times in order to really know who you are. And I was like, okay, that requires patience.
Yeah.
So the process, Bradley, is this. We start out with an idea. Now, where do we get these ideas from? This is a first good step. You have clients. Look at how you got your clients. You have clients who have said no. You've had clients who have said yes. Go interview them and say, how would you prefer to be contacted if somebody like me was going to be contacting you? I don't know why people just don't. 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, they ask all the time, why, daddy? Why, mommy? Why? We don't ask as adults. So once you understand that, then put like 10 ideas down on a page. Then each month, put 1 out. Now, if you're so busy, you can't do it 1 every 45 days or 1 every 60 days. If you go over 60 days, Bradley and I are going to drive to your house and we're going to have a conversation with you. So I'm joking. Well, we might. I don't know. But every 30 days is preferable. You put it into play, see how it works. You grade it. I learned this from Jay. Grade it from A through F. F being it failed, A being, hey, we're going to Harvard University because it's an A+, right? And each month, you're looking at it and saying, this worked, I don't think this worked, you're testing it. And you're trying to move it from the C to a B+ to a B to an A, and so on, right? When you can get it in the A to B range, those are high performing activities. C's, D's and F's, right? So what you're doing is you're grading these things and you're giving it a bit of time. Now, if you're doing a short activity and you can't dial it in within the first 30 to 60 days, it's probably not going to work for you, right? But here's the thing. You got to give it a truthful evaluation. If it's like you're making cold calls and you're like, oh, I didn't really give it my all on this call. Well, it's not the cold call. It's the individual, right? So, but what you're trying to do is get it to an A or B. and you just take your time doing that. So usually 30 to 90 days is kind of the window for most of the stuff that I test. But like with a podcast, you're not going to know in 30 to 90 days, right? I mean, when we launched our podcast, I made $82,000 in the first year off the podcast. And I was like, I went to my people who work for me in the company, and I'm like, we're killing this podcast. Like, no way. It's like $82,000, all this effort, energy. And then they said, well, why don't you talk to some other podcasters? And I did. And they're like, you made $82,000 in your first year in your pod. What are you, crazy? You're killing that? What are you, dumb? Right. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, because I was ignorant. Right. So really, I guess that was an A or a B, really, in a lot of ways. But we got to give it time on something like a podcast, because the average podcast doesn't start producing something for 6 to 12-ish months out. Yeah. So if we just judge it on a 30 to 90 day basis, you're going to clip it off before it's success. I just happened to be lucky in the first, second, third month, people were calling me and hiring me off the podcast. But if you're doing something short term, 30 to 90 days.
So we're about out of time, but I'm curious, if our audience wants to find you, pick your brain, work with you guys, where do they find you? What do your engagements look like?
Yeah, I mean, so we run a master class twice a month. Is it okay if I promote that?
Yeah, so I'm giving you an opportunity, self-promote.
Okay. So we're doing one regularly. We call it Stop the Leak. Okay. And so it's at ceosalesstrategies.com/stop the leak. And we're soon going to put up another link because we're going to be adding additional master classes, but that would be at ceosalesstrategies.com/MC for masterclass, where you could see all of them. But right now we're focused on this one masterclass. And that would be a great place for them to check it out. They can, if they just Google me, Bradley, at Doug C. Brown. Mm-hmm. Don't do Doug Brown, because Doug Brown's a professional hockey player. Okay. He used to play for the Detroit Red Wings, and his son plays for the Boston Bruins. And I can't skate to save my soul. So, but Doug C. Brown, revenue growth, I'll come up everywhere. My LinkedIn is Doug Brown 123. But if they want to send an email directly, just send it to Doug@ceosalesstrategies.com. The engagements, a lot of times people, I'm going to say this just for the record, we work with all size companies. So you can be a solo. We work with lots of solos. And I've also worked with Intuit, Procter & Gamble, CBS Television, and those type of companies. So, if you have a desire and want to talk, please reach out. If you want, to listen to our podcast, it's the CEO Sales Strategies podcast.
Awesome. And we'll link everything in the show notes so people will be able to access it. No problem. So
thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. It's really the top thing is predictable revenue. It truly is for our audience. So hopefully people learned a thing or two from hearing you speak, and just appreciate your time and insights.
Bradley, I also want to put out there, if people want to give me a little bit of feedback, I've actually been thinking about writing a book on predictable revenue. So if they're interested in that too, just let me know that, because if I get enough responses, then I will write the book and put it out there for people.
Yeah. I mean, my response would be absolutely. I think I would almost guarantee. And the question really ends up being to you of what's your niche within that, right? Because predictable revenue can be for anybody. I'm sure there's been books written about it. What niche would you pick and help you really stand out?
Yeah. It's a great point, right? And I, this is exactly what we teach, and we have, because what's going on in the world, we're now focusing more on individuals, independent business professionals, and individuals, because I don't like what's going on in the world. I mean, I have daughters who are in their 20s, and I hear their friends talk, and they're like, "My God, I can't afford an apartment, right? I can't afford this." When I was in my 20s, I didn't really say those things, because, at least it was attainable. And people are trying to retire. So our idea is similar to yours, help people make an extra $100,000 a year. And it's the difference between living life and living a quality of life.
Yeah. Love it. Well, I would love to read the book. So
All right.
feedback of one here. But yeah, appreciate your time, Doug, and wishing you all the best with your business and the upcoming book.
Thank you.